Institute for Security Studies. Stephanie, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, this is a conundrum, it seems to me like.
It's a surprise. I think we had high hopes after the military defeat of the M23. We had expected there to be a swift signing of the agreement. Most of the key issues have been ironed out over the weeks, in fact, prior to the military defeat of the M23. So the Congolese government's decision at the last minute to disagree over these slight terms is a surprise.
The wording, it seems to be a problem. Is it a peace deal or is it what?
Well, the Congolese government seems to want it to be what they call a declaration. In other words, I think they feel that the M23 has been defeated. Why do you sign an agreement with a defeated movement? It's a declaration in which you say the M23 is no longer existing, and now we will integrate them on the following terms.
Is that the only sticky point, or is there more?
Well, that seems to be the only official sticking point. I think a few things have happened in the interim. The military leader of the M23, Sultani Makenga, is in custody in Uganda. Ugandan officials have also said there are about 1,500 M23 rebels in that country. This is a figure which is very surprising because we think that the M23 were probably no stronger than 800. We wonder why the Ugandan officials are therefore talking about 1,500. And in general, what we're concerned about is whether the Ugandan government is willing to hand these rebels and Sultani Makenga back to the Congolese authorities, as they would have to do under previous agreements.
Some reports suggest that blanket amnesty for the rebel leaders could be also one of the problem issues.
That was the sticking point leading up to previous talks. The Congolese government has refused to integrate Sultani Makenga and other military leaders who are guilty of crimes against humanity. There are also UN sanctions against Sultani Makenga, US sanctions. So certainly the military leadership and some of the civilian leadership has no prospect really of any kind of future. And that was clearly a sticking point. But that was before the military defeat of the M23. So we had really not expected that to continue to be a major issue now, but it seems to be.
So whether it's a declaration or a peace agreement, this peace agreement is not the very first one. Will it hold if it is being signed?
I think that really depends on whether or not Rwanda refrains from supporting the M23. One of the reasons the M23 was defeated by the Congolese army and by the coalition of international forces was that Rwanda did not support it as it has in the past. Whether it continues to do that remains to be seen. I think that the Congolese government's attitude this week, walking away from the talks, will perhaps change Rwanda's mind about its long-term role with the M23.
Now, what about the other small rebel groups that's still in the country? Will that still pose a problem in the region?
Absolutely. I mean, the M23 is one of many different groups. There are small and not so small rebel groups. The FDLR, which the Congolese government has announced is the next target, is in fact a Rwandan Hutu, leftovers of the Rwandan Hutu militia that committed the genocide in 1994. They have been in eastern DRC for some 20 years. They are a more dispersed group, more difficult to defeat militarily, and also the political issues there have to be resolved between the FDLR and the Rwandan government. So that's another angle that is complicating things. But the domestic armed groups as well, that is going to be a long-term process. Kinshasa will have to make some political overtures. There'll have to be a robust disarmament and demobilization process. And so there's still a long way to go after even the M23 is eliminated, if that does happen.
And that's why I call it a conundrum. It's not just one party. Now, what makes the Eastern DRC so attractive to militants?
It's a historical issue. The region has been, Rwanda in particular, has been active in Eastern DRC since essentially the coalition that overthrew Mobutu in 1996. The Rwandan Hutu militia, which committed the genocide, sought refuge in the eastern DRC. When Kagame came to power, he saw that their presence there as a clear threat to the security of Rwanda. Over the years, that threat has evolved, but Rwanda has always argued that the Congolese army is incapable of protecting its own borders and that that's why it's involved there. There's also a question of a lack of state authority. The Congo is a big country, and there has been a breakdown in a collapse in state authority over the years. The East is the most advanced example of that. And so there's an absence of civilian and military authority that can really try and establish itself. And that certainly makes the East more attractive as well. There are also long-standing local conflicts, some ethnic conflicts. So there's a cocktail really of factors which have made that region unstable. It doesn't mean it can't be fixed, but it requires political will from Kinshasa, and it requires regional peace as well.
Now, what role can SADC and the African Union play in maybe dousing these fires in the Eastern DRC?
Well, SADC has been amongst the most robust. It has taken a strong stance against the M23 in particular, and it was behind the creation of the Force Intervention Brigade, which played a role in the military defeat. South Africa obviously plays a big role there as well. I think that now that we are sitting in a situation where we've had some military successes, it's time for some political solutions. SADC clearly can put some political pressure on Kabila to perhaps not get stuck on small things and perhaps sign this agreement with the M23 and move forward. So I think it is time for some political leverage to be exerted, and SADC is an organization that certainly could do that.
Stephanie, some wonderful analysis. Thank you so much for your time. That was Stephanie Wolters, an analyst of the Great Lakes